This is Gemara Nazir Daf Samoch Aleph. Apologies for lateness of this year. This is Shabbos' Daf. B'siyata Dishmaya will be getting up Sundays momentarily as well, so we'll be able to catch up and thereby be able to go back on a regular schedule, having Monday shir up the night before. And B'siyata Dishmaya, an exciting day as we finish the second to last parak of Maseches Nazir, and is the home stretch, the final week, Baruch Hashem, of an incredible journey, a journey that in reality wasn't just Maseches Nazir. Nazir and Nidarim are really a bit in one, so this has been quite the journey, and then we're going to dive straight into Saita, a little bit of a smaller, a little bit of a shorter and easier at some level, or lighter Masechta. And as always, we encourage others to encourage their friends, whether one has been doing Daf Yomi or not. Why not get a little Masechta under your belt in anticipation of Shavuos, B'siyata Dishmaya. So the top line of Samach Aleph says the Gemara, Tani Rav Chia Zel Lefnei Biyas Mayim. This is really just wrapping up Rav Shimon Bar Yochai Rashbi from yesterday's daf. Zel Achar Biyas Mayim Zel Lefnei Zrikas Damim Zel Achar Zrikas Damim. This again is the way that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai explained on the bottom of Samoch Amid Beis. Shatiglachas Hanega Vechulu, 3 lines down at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said that Tiglachas of the Nega, of the Mitzaira, when it's obligatory, then it overrides a Nazir's Isser to shave. But when it's not, when it was a Safek, then it does not. And the Mishnah mentioned that we have 4 Tiglachiyos that are necessary in our case. Our case again of a Safek Mitzaira, a Safek Tamei Mace, and we have a Nazir. So it's maybe a Tamei Mace, maybe a Mitzaira. You need to have 2 shavings 30 days apart for the Mitzaira, another 2 shavings 30 days apart for the Tumah and for the Nazirus. After 120 days, he is finished. So these 4 shavings dekamer that you're speaking of, Misham Mitzvah or Misham Avurei Seir Tumah. Ask the Gemara fundamentally, when we remove the hair of the Mitzaira, of the Nazir, what is the purpose? What is the underlying reason behind this thing? Is it as a mitzvah? You got to do your mitzvah. Or no, you have to remove specifically the hair, the Seyar of Tumah, the hair that's on the Nazir's head when he became Tameh. And obviously, from the way that the Gemara is asking the question, it seemingly is honing in more on a regular Nazir becoming Tameh more than any other case. So Lamai Nafkamina, says the Gemara, who cares? Regardless, you have to shave. Says the Gemara, you know that Nafkamina is Avure Binasha. Are you allowed to remove the hair with a hair removing agent, or do you have to specifically shave with a razor? If there's a specific mitzvah to shave the head, then it will not suffice just to remove the hair, because it's not just removal of hair. There's a positive commandment to shave the head. However, if the reason is Toma, you have to just remove and rid yourself of this impure hair, then even removing it with a hair removing agent would be enough. So what is the din? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav, an explicit Braisa, Tashema, Umigaleach, Arba Tiglachiyos. Braisa says, Giluach, shaving the 4 shavings. So he, Sagadim Shemavuri, Seir Tama, Afilu Shalosh Nani Sagilei. If the reason was just to remove the Tama hair, you shouldn't need the 4th time. Why? Because the 4th time is not Nazir Tuma anymore. Because the 4th time he's already tahor for sure. So that final time shouldn't be necessary. For the fact that you need the final 4th shaving, Shema Mina, Misha Mitzvah Shema Mina, that is the raya that it's caused the mitzvah. That is the raya that has to be done davka with a razor. Hadran alach shnei nazirim. We should do an incredible chazara. Try to wrap up these dinim. A little bit of a complicated parak dealing with the suffix that we had the entire time. And B'siyata D'Shemaya, we're going to go straight into the 9th and final parak of Maseches Nazir, which B'siyata D'Shemaya will culminate in finishing this wonderful limud and thereby propelling us forwards in Shas into Maseches Saita. We pick it up with Perek HaKutim. Says the Mishnah HaKutim. Now what are Kutim? Well, for all intents and purposes, I say for our intents and purposes, Kutim or Goyim. Big machlokes, big sugya. Where Kutim Geirai is aim, where Kutim Geiriyem is aim. It seems that they did convert in the times of Nach and Yeshua. Question is, what exactly happened? But for all intents and purposes that we're discussing, as you see in the first Mefirish on the side of the page here, which he points out, Hakutim Eilan Naziras, Ha'oivdi Kochavim, a guy, Shenadru ben Naziras, that makes a neder Naziras. What is halacha? Ein Naziros Chala Aleim, Umutar Ligaleach, L'Shasyayin L'Tam L'Mesim. So, says the Mishnah, so again, for our intents and purposes, we're going to be assuming this is referring to a good old-fashioned guy. Says the Mishnah, Hakutim. Oh, I'm sorry, our page just shrunk. There it is. Now we're back. Hakutim ilam naziriyos. There's no din naziris by a kuti. Continues the Mishnah. Noshim, women. Va'avadim, slaves. Yesh lam naziris. Chaymer b'nashem, maybe avadim. There's a stringency of a woman over slaves. That what? Shu kaifes avdoi ve'enoi kaifes ishtoi. That one could force his eved to do what? To not be a nazir. If he doesn't want his eved, he wants his eved to be able to drink well and shave his head, etc. But he cannot force his wife. So says the Gemara, Katani kutim ein lahem naziros. We learned that a kuti, this goyim, do not have a din naziris. And ask the Gemara, Minani Mili, how do you know? In truth, the duration of today's shir is really going to be trying to figure out this detail. What are the sources that a kuti, that woman, that avadim are yes or no subject to naziris? And within figuring out the sources, of course, we'll understand why exactly they would or would not have naziris. The Tana Rabbanon, says the Gemara, Daber Abnei Yisrael v'loy le'akom. Says the Torah, speak to Klal Yisrael, which means v'loy le'akom. And if we look for a moment at the pasuk on the side of the Gemara, let's just move it over, everyone can see it. Says the pasuk, Daber Abnei Yisrael v'marta aleim. Ish or Isha ki ifli lindar neder nazir lazil Hashem. Hopefully this pasuk by now we're familiar with. It's the pasuk of Nedarim, Yafli. It's the pasuk of Naziros, and it says Bnei Yisrael. So the Gemara has a very simple drasha: Bnei Yisrael v'loy le'akum. V'amarta alehem, continues the pasuk that we just read, and you should tell to them, l'rabbis as avodim. Who's this extra alehem? That is the avadim. So goyim are excluded, and avadim, our servants, are included. Continues the Gemara. We're 7 lines into the new parak. First one line is aleim. Lama likra. Ask the Gemara, why do I need a pasuk to be marbeh to include avadim? Amrit. But we've learned komisar isha chayavisba, even chayava. Classical rule, Gemara in Kedushin, that we're going to see v'siyata d'shmaya. I think Gemara in Kedushin. But either way, anything that a woman is chayv, an eved is chayv. So why do you need a special limud for an eved? Amar Rava, says Rava Shiny Ach, over here by Naziris is different. The Amar Krales or Isar al Nafshoi, says the Torah, to bind his nefesh. So what do we learn now? To Misha Nafshoi Kinuya Loi. So the pasuk is teaching us when it comes to Nazir, it has to be someone that has an nefesh, that his soul is kanu, is acquired to him. Yotza Eved Shei Nafshoi Kinuya Loi. A servant is excluded, that his soul is not his own. What do you mean it's not his own? It belongs to the master. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Hayel Vei Nafshoi Kinuya Loi. Ema Gabe Nazir. Nami loy, if his soul is not his own, and therefore he's not included in Nidarim. So right, we really should qualify that what we're talking about over here is in general Nidarim. So says the Gemara, why don't we extend it to Nazirus as well? Ema gam Nazirus nami lai, that an Eved should not be included in Nazirus. So therefore, Kamash Malon, the extra riboy, ve'amarta aleihem, I was right, ve'amarta aleihem, which comes to include an Eved. So that is the reason we need the inclusion, and that is the inclusion of the Eved. Amar Mar, continues the Gemara, let's delve a bit deeper into this limud of Daber el Bnei Yisrael, which is excluding Goyim, ve'amarta aleihem, which is including Avodim. Daber el Bnei Yisrael. V'loi la'akom, ask the Gemara, Cholechel d'chsev Yisrael, akom loi. Is that a true drasha? Asked the Gemara. Anytime we find in the Torah that it says Yisrael, that means no Goyim. V'gabi erchim, when it comes to erchin is one can give his value, his erech, his value to the Beis Hamikdash. Someone gives someone else's erech. I give my own erech, I can give your erech. Depending on the age of the person, depending on the gender of the person, as we're about to see, depending on the status of the person's status, meaning is he an Eved or not, will determine his erech. So ask the Gemara by erech and techsev Daber el Bnei Yisrael. It also says Bnei Yisrael, and yet V'tanya we learned in the Brayso Bnei Yisrael ma'arichin, Ako ma'arichin, that Bnei Yisrael can create an erech, they can give the value, but not an akom. Yochel, you would think, lo yiyuna erachin, you would think that they're not also the subject of the erech. Again, erech is two things. One is I could give my value or someone's value, or two is someone can give my value. So one is, am I able to be the giver? That's part A. Part B is, can I be the value? Can I be the muscle, the litmus test, how much to give? So says the Gemara, Yachal, I would think, that the Avodim cannot be included in being the actual value, that if someone says, I'm giving the Erech of Ploni, and that guy is an Eved, maybe there's nothing to give. Talmud Loimar, to counter that, says the Torah, Ish, and that includes an Eved. So ask the Gemara, I don't understand. By Nazir, we have the same words. It also says Ish. So why are you telling me, Vamarta Aleihem excludes Avodim? Why are you telling me, Bnei Yisrael, why are you telling me, that was completely incorrect. One more time. Rewind for a moment. Why are you telling me that Bnei Yisrael excludes Goyim? We see over here, when it comes to Erech, that the fact that it says Ish is including Goyim. Answers the Gemara, Shiny Acha, Nazirus is different, and Goyim are not included at all. Damar Kra, La'aviv Ulima Lo Yitama. To father or mother, you cannot become Tameh. So now the Torah is taking the dinam of Nazirus and telling us, someone who has a father and potentially could become Tameh, and we're saying you can't due to your Nazirus, that teaches me Yotza Akum Shein Lo'av. There's no halachic father when it comes to a Goy. Therefore, we see the Goyim are not included in Nazirus. Ask the Gemara 1 second. Lumnai, what exactly is this detail that the Goyim don't have fathers with regard to? If you're going to say it's regard to inheritance, 5 lines from the bottom, Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. It's not true. A guy, yes, inherits his father midaraisa. So with what regard is a guy excluded from Yerusha? Ella. So suggests the Gemara, B'misha muzar al kibud aviv, that you know what the pasuk means. When the pasuk says lo yitama, it means someone who is potentially included of kivud avaim that was excluded. They can't be matamet them if they're a Nazir. So, and the Gemara is suggesting that Goyim are not included in kivud avaim, and therefore there'll be no din of Nazirus. Asks the Gemara, 1 second, Miksiv Kabed Avicha? Does it say Kabed Avicha Gabe Nazir? Meaning, what shaykhis? Why are you pinning the dinim of Nazirus on Kibbutz Av? When it came to Yerusha, I understood that's part of that same Torah, part of the same Parasha. But where does Kibbutz Av come in? So says the Gemara, Ela Amar Kra, you know what the limud is? Laviv Alima Lo Yitama. For the fact that Torah says you can't become tummy to father and mother. But mi sheyesh Lo Tama. So we see that the Nazirus only applies to someone who has potential Tama. And as we turn over to Samach Aleph Amud Beis, says the Gemara and articulates, Yatza'akom. So now we understand why the guy is excluded. She'ein Loi Tama. The reason being simply, there's no Tama to a guy. That is the source of our Mishnah, that there's no din of Naziros by an Akum. So says the Gemara, now how do you know that that din is true? Which din? The din you just said, the din of Tama. Says the Gemara, Minal and Delesle Tama. How do you know there's no din of Tama by a guy? Damar Kra, says the Torah, Yitama, says the pasuk, and to the man who will become Tameh, v'lo yischata, and he will not, v'lo yischata, v'nichsa nefesh mitoich hakol, and he's not going to become pure, and his soul will be cut off from Klal Yisrael. So what do we learn out? 4 lines down, Samachal and Beis. Be'mi sheyesh lo kahal. Only someone who is part of the congregation. Yatzah the guy she'ein lo kahal. So says the Gemara, Samimai. So where do we see that the guy is completely excluded? Del makare sudul mechayif. Aval tamu mitamu. The pasuk you just quoted is a pasuk about krisus. So maybe you're right. You have a source that the guy is no krisus. But how do you know that the guy is completely excluded from all dinei tuma v'tayra? Answers the Gemara, Amar Kra. Vizatar ala tamei should sprinkle the tar on the tamei kol sheish lo itayra yesh lo itama kol she'ein lo itayra ein lo itama. Because the guy does not have dinim of Taira, there's no dinim of Tama. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Ve'ema Tairu d'lo have. Maybe they just don't have a din of Taira. Tama havale. How do you know the two are dependent upon each other? Amar Kra v'isha she'yitama v'lo yischata. Because the pasuk clearly speaks out, the man becomes tamei v'lo yischata, doesn't become pure, clearly pinning one on the others. That is the source that goyim have no tama, which will lead us to the source that the guy is excluded from the dinim of Nezirus. So now the Gemara, it's almost like an Amar Mar or a Tashamar right now. We're about 12 lines down. The first one line is Ve'ish. The Gemara continues with Rav Achiv by Yaakov Amar. But just to realize that we're commenting really back on something in Amud Aleph, that the first suggestion why a guy should be excluded from the Nazirus was what? Was because they're excluded from inheritance, Yerusha. So now in that detail says the Gemara, Rav Achiv bar Yaakov Amar, Shayni Yacha, says Rav Achiv bar Yaakov, this is different. Amar Kra, says the Torah, says the Torah, and you shall pass the inheritance to your children after you. Kol sheyesh lo nachalo, yesh lo toma. Kol she'ein lo nachalo, ein lo toma. So that's going to be the source to Goyim with regard to Yerusha. And from here it would seem that, what do we say on Samach Aleph Amud Aleph? We said that Goyim are not involved in Yerusha, and that's why they're not involved in Naziros. Says the Gemara, no. We see clear, if you have a nachla yishlo tama, in lo nachla in lo tama. So what would this seem to indicate? This would seem to indicate that Goyim indeed would have some level of nachala. Says the Gemara, 1 second. If that was true, avadim nami loi, avadim should be in the same boat. If this was the source, avadim should be the same, and therefore the dinim on the zero should not apply to avadim as well. And therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. Ella amar rava naya mekar beish lo mekabi erchin. I understand by erchin shnemar b'nei Yisrael marechin Ve'nakom arichin. That I can understand. Yochel, and I would think they themselves don't have a dollar value. If you want to say you're giving their value, Tamaloi mar ish. So says Torah ish. Then no, they are. So hacha b'nei Yisrael Nazrin umeviin carbon ve'nakom Nazrin umeviin carbon. So rather, what are we going to say? That b'nei Yisrael create Naziros and they bring the carbonis. But a guy maybe is a middle level, another middle level, keep on splitting hairs finer and finer. They could be a Nazir, but there's no carbon Nazir. Yachal, you would think Avlay Nazir and Klal, maybe they're not Nazir at all. Tamalaymar ish. Says the Torah, ish, which comes to include anyone who's a man, including a guy. Amri, so says the Gemara, 1 second. If you're going to say Mishum Karbon, Nav Me'acha Nafkalei, Ella Me'hasam. If you're telling me that the Goyim are just excluded from Karbon, well, you have another source that says, Lo'ila Prat L'Naziros. For an Oila, which comes to exclude the Naziros Karbonis, Devrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So says the Gemara, the fact that the Torah says B'nai Yisrael with regard to Naziros is not coming to exclude them from the Goyim from Naziros, and therefore it's not coming to include Goyim from Naziros Karbonos, because we know that either way. So therefore, it's just coming to include the general exclusion of a guy from all Dinei Naziros. Ask the Gemara, Ema b'nei Yisrael Nazir Naziros Eilam ve'nakam Nazir Naziros Eilam. And again, because we don't have a clear makar excluding Goyim, and we just know something is excluded, the Gemara is going at great lengths to figure out maybe it's a prat, maybe it's a detail within Naziris that they're excluded. How do we know they're completely excluded? So Yachalay Nazir, maybe they're not Nazir at all. Tamalamer ish. Amar Rav Yochanan Miksev Nazir Olam. What do you suggest? It's hard to say Nazir Olam, so why would that be the point of difference? Says the Gemara again, Ema b'nei Yisrael Madirim b'neyan b'nazir v'inakam Madirim b'neyan b'nazir. Maybe you know what the exclusion is? The exclusion is that Goyim cannot be Madir for their children, whereas Yidden can. Yachol, and I would think Nazirim Klal, Tamalamer Ish. Amar Rav Yochanan answers the Gemara, Halach ibn Nazir. That din, and this should remind us, we've had this well back when, that din, that a Nazir has a control over his child, and can be Neider Nazirs for his child as well, that's Halach l'Moshe Sinai, and that's not something that's learned from the Torah. And we conclude, ask the Gemara, Ima b'nei Yisrael megalchen al naziros aveyan, ve'ina akim megalchen naziros aviyim. Again, another is almost like an incredible chazara to finish the Masechta. We're bringing all previous dinim. We had a din that if someone becomes a Nazir, sets aside money to buy karbanos and whatnot, and then he's nifter. What do we do with all the money, karbanos, etc.? So the question is, do the children inherit it, that if the child becomes a Nazir, he could utilize those monies? So suggest the Gemara, maybe that din that a child could do it is a din specifically only by a yid and not by a guy. We turn over to Samach Beis Amid Aleph and we conclude, as the Gemara says again, Yachal, you would think Lo Nazrin, they can't be a Nazir at all. Talmud Loimar Ish, says Torah Ish, and the Gemara concludes, again, this din about letting your son, the child, being able to take over the fathers as well. Allah Sinai. So we wouldn't necessarily need a pasuk from there. That is a guy. That is an evidence with regard to Naziros. We'll pick it up from here in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.